to this session of Belonging by Design. This is session 3, although we did not have session 2. The presenter had some family issues, and we're hoping to reschedule her for next spring or next fall. But today's topic is inclusive design as a framework for creating equitable environments. I want to thank Ann Weidman for being here and doing backup here for the tech stuff, and I also want to thank the Plan New Hampshire Program Committee for their support for this program today. I also want to thank AIA New Hampshire for their tremendous support of this particular series. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There are 1.5 AIA credits for this. If you send your name and your AIA number to me, then I can be sure that it gets forwarded to Bonnie. There are also 1.5 AICP credits. It is this program number, 9204614. So that, I'm not sure how to do that. If you need something from me, nobody's ever asked me before, but I'm happy to provide anything. You do need to attend the entire webinar in order to get credits for this. So that's really important to keep in mind. Please mute, once we get started, mute your audio and turn off your video, but first we're going to go around and introduce ourselves. And please also note that this webinar is being recorded. Just a bit about Plan New Hampshire. We are an independent organization made up of members and others. We have a vision of healthy and vibrant communities around the state, and our mission is to foster excellence in planning and design and development of our built environment. So that's our focus, is how can the built environment support healthy and vibrant communities? And our strategy, one of our strategies, is to share information and inspiration for how community design and the built environment can contribute to positive places to live and work and play. And that's what we're all about. And if you're not a member, we invite you to consider becoming a member. So today we are going to have a conversation with Valerie Fletcher from the Institute for Human-Centered Design. And before I introduce her, I'd like to really quickly have every one of you open up your video and open your audio and just really quickly introduce yourself. We just want to have a sense of who's in the room. So if you could take a second to unmute, there's down at the bottom of your screen on the left, there you go. And then I'm going to call on you in the order that I see you in my screen. But because it's always changing around, maybe I'll go to, there we go. Please, if you haven't introduced yourself, if I've missed you, it's just because the screen keeps bouncing around. Just keep going. So Bonnie Castle.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Castell. I'm Executive Director for AIA New Hampshire.
Great.
Nice to see you again.
Thanks, Bonnie. It's good to see you here. Sandra.
Hi, Sandra Hodge. I'm a Principal and Director of Interior Design at JSA.
Great. Sarah Curtis. Unmute. There you go.
Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Curtis from JSA Design. I do the marketing over here, and I help plan when I can.
That's great. Yeah, she's been a great support for Plan. David Bolduc.
Hi, Dave Bolduc from Wolfboro, New Hampshire, board member for GALA, which is in the initial stages of setting up a makerspace.
That's great. I'm so glad that you're here. That's great.
Yeah.
Welcome. Welcome. Who else do we have? Todd Hansen.
I'm Todd Hansen, a principal of JSA and a founder of Access Navigators. And I'm also a big Valerie Fletcher fan.
Yes, you are. Thanks, Todd. North Sturdivant.
I'm North Sturdivant. I'm with JSA Architects and a longtime board member with Plan New Hampshire. And I expect to be a Valerie Fletcher fan when this is over.
Kelly DeMore.
Hi, I'm Kelly DeMore. I'm a partner at Nathan Wexler & Company. I'm also a board member of Plan New Hampshire, so I'm interested to see what's going on. And David, I went through Leadership New Hampshire with your founder of GALA. So I'm really excited for him and his life.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Josh Arnold. Caitlin. Caitlin was our presenter a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, one of them. Caitlin Cameron. I'm the urban designer for the city of Portland, Maine. in the planning office there, and I was one of the presenters for the Congress Square redesign project.
That's great. I'm so glad to have you here. Christy St. Laurent, you've been to so many of our webinars and I've never had a chance to meet you. Welcome.
Nice to meet you, Robin. Valerie, actually, I met you probably 25 years ago. I used to live in Charlestown, and I was trying to start a universal design consulting business. I went to a Harvard extension class that you had done in conjunction with some others. Anyway, our paths have crossed a number of times. You're usually the speaker. I'm in the audience. It's super excited to hear you today. I'm a physical therapist by training, 11 years on a local planning board, and currently a candidate for state rep.
Oh, good for you. That's great. Thanks. Ben Frost.
Hey, Robin. Ben from New Hampshire Housing, longtime fan of Plan New Hampshire and Valerie Fletcher. And Valerie, you might recall that my son Matt and I interviewed you for the film he produced on blind wayfinding,
I surely do, Ben. How could I forget?
Great to see you again.
Great to see you too. I was delighted to know you were coming.
That's great. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Stephanie
Hi,
Vidal.
I'm Stephanie Verdile. I'm a principal planner at the Office of Strategic Initiatives in the Planning Division. And I'm looking forward to today's webinar and wish we were doing it in person.
Yeah, me too. Glad you're here. Oh, that's great. Cheryl Marcotte.
Hi, I'm Cheryl. I'm the elderly case manager here at Community Action Program in New Hampshire.
Great to have you with us. Brian Garris.
Hey, how you doing? Brian Garris, principal with Milestone Construction and also the current Plan New Hampshire president. Glad to be here.
Yes, we are glad to have you here. Aaron LaPlante, we can't see you, but we know you're there.
I just pretend I'm Brandon because I was setting up the computer for him. So Brandon Holman is here.
Brandon, okay.
Hello. So Brandon Holman, principal, Winter Holman across the table for me. I'm operations and marketing for Winter Holman.
Okay, great. Well, you can join in too.
Thank you.
Thanks. Christina Ashtian.
Yes, hi, Christina Ashtian from Moulton Borough, where I'm the chair of the Moulton Borough Heritage Commission. And we were very lucky to have 2 Plan New Hampshire charrettes, one in 2012 and a follow-up one just 2 years ago in 2018.
Yeah, and it's great. Thanks. I'm glad you could join us today. Elena Pickett.
Hi. Yeah, Pickett. Sorry, I have my laptop docked, so I don't have video at the moment, but I am assistant city planner and zoning administrator for the city of Dover, but also personally I'm involved with the Gala Makerspace effort.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So you're wearing 2 hats. That's great.
Yes.
Dia.
Hi, everybody. Again, I apologize. My camera isn't working well, but I see all of you. So I work at FIRST, which stands for Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology. We're a nonprofit organization that does robotics, but I'm also an artist. I teach at the New England College Institute and working on a project with Arms Park, which is down in the Mill Yard where FIRST is and the Institute's nearby. So thank you for including me.
Oh, absolutely. Welcome. Barbara Holstein, another person who's been to many of our webinars. Welcome.
Hi, I'm a Plan New Hampshire member. I'm also I'm a commissioner with the SRPC and work a lot with the planning boards and zoning. So I'm anxious to hear Valerie. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Heather Rowan.
Hi, I am the program chair for Plan and currently looking for work. So if anybody has any kind of BD position ideas, please reach out. But Plan has been keeping me going on a nice schedule, thank goodness. But I'm really looking forward to today's program.
Great. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
you're here. Thank you. So so welcome everyone. If you could please now turn off your videos and turn off your audio. We will be joining again in a little while. We'll be having breakout rooms, but for right now, we'll just have you close out and listen. And welcome again to Valerie. You can see we have quite a combination of people here. It's a really great group. Everybody in this group is awesome, and I'm so glad that they're here. For all of you who don't know Valerie, Valerie Fletcher has been the executive director of the Institute for Human-Centered Design in Boston since 1998. She currently serves on the Board of Trustees for the Boston Architectural College, and she's a special advisor on universal design for the Singapore Building Construction Administration. Among her previous advisory and leadership roles was a special advisor on accessibility and universal design to the UN Department of Social and Economic Development in the early 2000s. Her CV includes education at Harvard and at Lesley College, and numerous published pieces related to universal design and positions on many international awards juries. She has presented at the Smithsonian. She's presented in Bangkok, in Slovakia, in Seoul, and other places around the world, most recently for a gathering of over 600 people in Istanbul. We're very lucky to have her here today for us in New Hampshire. Welcome, Valerie.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm thrilled that we had a chance to actually have people introduce themselves. A lot of familiar names, but also a lot of familiar organizations. And I'm really honored to be able to spend a bit of time with people who I know not only care about ideas, but actually know how to make them work, which is always what we want to be doing. So I am going to do this in two parts. And the first one is really to lay out the conceptual pieces. And then we're going to take a dialogue break. We're going to have an opportunity to talk after this. So some of you know this framework, but I want to walk it through because it's not a fixed framework. It's constantly evolving. And that's a big part of what I want to talk to you about today. So I'm just going to get going and hope it all works. Some of you may know us from our headquarters. Our only physical headquarters are located in Boston, very near North Station. One day you can come and visit us again. We take up the whole first floor of an historic building, and we have quotes about inclusive design in 7 languages. So if you see that, you've arrived. But there's not a soul there now, so one day we hope that is different, but not right now. But we are really about the role of design in social equity. That's the short story. And we're an oddball nonprofit, always been a nonprofit, but we do mission-driven consulting and design services. We also do education and training. Some of you may know that we have been the New England ADA Center since 1996, a very precious opportunity. We have a team of people who meet the kind of fixed requirements of each of the 10 ADA centers. And we are also dedicated to research, contextual inquiry, real people interacting with real environments. And those are both physical and digital. These are the things that drive us. We're really shooting for an outcome in which everybody gets a stronger sense of confidence, comfort, and control. Think of all the places we don't feel those things. We're seeking to provide that in greater proportions everywhere we work. And we are convinced, and we're convinced because we've been doing it for a long time, and we've proven the validity of the idea that if it works better at the edges of the spectrum, it works well for everyone. I think the first question is, who are you designing for? And that is really central to everything we do. That if we don't know who we're designing for and don't recognize the edge of the spectrum, we're really missing an understanding that is part of the creative dynamic of what we do. So I'm going to start with just a little bit on aging. The global movement for universal or inclusive design has been very heavily driven by the world's aging population. We've just never had a moment in human history that has had this phenomenon. So it's an extraordinary picture, and this is just a favorite chart of mine because it depicts both the majority world and the developed world, showing exactly the same arc, that we are all seeing massive changes in lifespan. And it's a very important reality for the poorest countries to the wealthiest. And I want to make a pitch that when we think about design for aging, we think about it in a more nuanced way than is typical. So distinct subsets, New Hampshire has certainly got a significant aging population. And I just want to pitch to you that we should be thinking at least about the young old, the old, and the oldest old when we think about design. And I want to credit a colleague in San Francisco, a physician, Louise Aronson, a gerontologist and physician, and she is making a very strong case that we need to be talking about childhood, adulthood, and oldhood. And she's completely sold me, since oldhood for many of us will last much longer than our childhood did. And we really need to get smart about it. Smart in how we design, smart in how we provide healthcare, smart in how we think. Human diversity reaches its apex in old age, I promise. I think any of you who are, close to the life experience and age I am know very well that 60 and 70-year-olds are far more different from one another than 5-year-olds. And think of life as a 3-act play. And issues of ability or disability. A reminder that we also have a greater awareness of disability globally. So we're looking at a billion people across the world, the majority of it in the developing world or the global south. That's simply because most of the population is in the global south, but also because there are different kinds of disability that are more prevalent in the global south. I will promise you this is a significant undercount. We still have countries across the world that do not count people in the same way, including my colleagues in Japan I work so closely with. They don't count anybody over 60 as having a disability. Then they categorize them as old, not as having a disability. So they have very low rates of disability, which of course is ridiculous. This is a new graphic that we've created in the context of a project I'll talk about in a minute, the changing reality of disability in America. And in this case, legal coverage of how we define disability has changed rather fundamentally in 30 years. So some of you may know it's the 30th anniversary of the ADA, which passed in 1990. And the law itself had a number of 43 million. Not the best demographers I know at the federal level can explain where that number came from, but it's a plausible number in 1990. We have much better data today. And there's been a big change over time in how in the United States this group of people we refer to as being in a protected class of people with disabilities has changed. So after 1990, it was carved back rather aggressively in the court systems. And many people intended originally to be covered were no longer covered. That was rectified in 2008 and rectified by the ADA Amendments Act, which clarified who is covered. And it covered not only issues of activities of daily living, but bodily systems. It clarified that bodily systems are included. And I promise you the numbers that we have today, 61 million adults counted by the US Census Bureau as people with disabilities, are not a group of people who would necessarily self-identify. But this is where we are today. That light green box below the dark green line is about the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health. This is the gold standard of how we think about disability internationally. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. This is where we are in 2020. So 26% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. And if people are interested in learning about what individual states look like, there's a really terrific US Census page that you can pull up. It's actually also a URL that's in this new report, The Changing Reality of Disability. But it's very interesting to see how different states are in terms of the number of people with disabilities and how much money they spend. A very interesting peek into very different behavior at the state level. So 2 in 5 adults 65 and older have a disability, 2 in 5 non-Hispanic American Indians, and 1 in 4 Black Americans. Disability does not fall equally on all Americans. And the reasons for disability have changed in a fundamental way. So today, mobility is still #1 among adults, but it is not wheelchair use, regardless of this federal icon of this person obviously using wheeled mobility. So 13.7% of the population, but only 1.4% outside of skilled nursing use wheeled mobility. This is mostly about difficulty walking or climbing stairs. So since in the United States, we count people across the lifespan from onset of adulthood at 21 to the end of life. We have many older people in that number. Take note that the second most prevalent reason for disability is cognition. And we use the term brain-based functional limitations because it's a little more general. So we're really talking about all of the gamut of reasons for brain-based difference. And that is everything from the difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. And we can unpack that more when we talk if that's of interest. Children have for now well more than 20 years had a rather fixed pattern in which 3 to 21 has 80% approximate with reasons for disability that are brain-based. That, not surprisingly, is now characteristic of adult students, so college and university students, and also young adults in the workforce. So the brain is the rising big story of our time. And just a second on sensory limitations among people in the US. Really important that we recognize that culturally deaf communities are a very important, distinct subculture that we need to be attentive to. It is not a large subculture in terms of people who speak sign language, American Sign Language, or other sign languages. The phenomenon of hearing loss is rising exponentially among middle-aged and older adults. And that's 37.8 million. Not all of them are being counted in that 61 million, but just to have a sense of proportion. Also important to have a sense of proportion around sight. So the general terminology of how we count is vision trouble. And it's a lesser percentage of adults, though still significant, then again tied to age. But 85% is a modest estimation of that population considered legally blind who actually have some vision, and they use it. So the population of people who are literally blind, the population of people who read Braille is small, and it isn't growing. In general, we have three broad categories of functional limitation: physical, sensory, and brain-based. And whatever we're designing, we need to be able to hold in mind these three broad categories of physical, sensory, and brain-based. And I want to take a minute before we get to this. Let me just say I do have, and I actually pulled it in and pulled it out. I actually do have specific data for New Hampshire, and I can share that with Robin. New Hampshire's population is small enough so that I have only one urban population data, one set of urban data population, because none of the rest of your towns are big enough to have reliable federal data at that level. But we'll share that. And this is a project that has been a very important part of my 2020. And I couldn't have told you in January when we started this project with a bit of funding, private funding actually, from the Memorial Fund of a colleague who was a professor of public health who died very suddenly of a heart attack 20 years ago. And his family gave me support to be able to undertake this project. The Changing Reality of Disability in America 2020. I had no idea in January how big a story this would come to be in this strangest of all years I recall. You can actually get both the full paper and the documentary, which is 27 minutes, by our colleagues who do all of our filmmaking work, digitalized film. But I urge you to take a look at it and at least give the report a perusal. And I'll show a few of the data points on this. I know the Native American population is a small population in the nation. It's really just 1% of the American population today, though fairly significant in our New England states. They have the highest rates of disability in America of a cultural population, 40% of adults, and very high proportions of kids. And this is just something that is tragically true today as it was 30 years ago. The African American population has the second highest rates of disability. And among the ways that we understand the particular status of Black Americans in relation to disability is the issue of, excuse me, chronic health conditions. High blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, as among those chronic health conditions. And African Americans have almost achieved a lifespan equivalent to white Americans, but they have not achieved a phenomenon that has occurred since the 80s of basically an abbreviated period of morbidity at the very end of life, which has been a great success of aging in America. Does not apply equally. So Black Americans and Brown Americans, so we have far less robust data for Brown Americans, but Black Americans, we know, have a premature morbidity that tends to begin in middle age. So what a 55-year-old Black American experiences looks a lot like a 70-year-old white American. And a reminder on how this hits for aging. I think all of us have some experience with dementia at this point. We all know that is the thing that is perhaps the most heartbreaking potential risk of aging. What we seldom pay attention to is that the highest rates of dementia are in the African American community. And all of us, certainly African Americans, are going to see a significant increase with the passage of time between now and 2060. One of the most dramatic changes in recent decades has really been the exponential growth of issues of substance use and of mental health conditions. Back in 1990, it was a heroic effort to get parity between mental and physical reasons for disability in the passage of the ADA. It is now really accepted. It was very much part of the World Health Organization commitment in the ICF, and it's certainly something that we've come to accept as a norm. What we didn't anticipate is that the numbers would be so huge. At this point, one of the most tragic understories of this data graphic is that in places in rural America, in particular, places that have lost blue-collar employment, we have a dramatic impact of this phenomenon. And you may have heard about a condition called deaths of despair, a truly heartbreaking term, but one that is significant in any state in the country that has significant rural populations that once upon a time had good blue-collar jobs. One of the things about this, and I'd be very curious to hear if this is a phenomenon you know, it basically is that people die in middle age of substance use, so alcoholism, of opioid addiction, and of suicide at rates that are so severe that almost 600,000 Americans have died since 1999 of these conditions. It is so dramatic and so seldom talked about, it's extraordinarily mysterious, but it has dropped the United States lifespan average to being number 43 globally. This one phenomenon of deaths of despair. So the issue of inequity does not fall just on people of color. A quick moment on accessibility standards and codes. They're a critical floor, they are a baseline for inclusive design, and they don't get us to where we need to go. I do want to affirm that accessibility laws and codes were the first in the world to introduce design as a civil and human right for people with disabilities. So important that people understand that, and that they don't revert to thinking that this is all about code, just tell me what I have to do, but a civil right. And then accessibility compliance is a valuable floor, but limited to some people with some disabilities in some environments. Just tell me what I have to do is deadly for designers. If there's anybody as a designer or a planner who finds that exactly what you want to hear, tell me about that, because maybe I'm just ignorant. Lighting is one of the things that's really, the ADA is silent on this, and so important. Acoustics, so important when we're talking about some of the rising reasons for disability. So this thing, inclusive and universal, I'm going to explain to you why I'm using why I'm using inclusive over universal. So we have been players in this game for a very long time. Our first book on universal design, Strategies for Teaching Universal Design, was published in 1995. And we ran the first international conference in New York in 1998. But this framework was really evolving in the 90s, so this is hardly new. But always this talk of a framework for thinking differently. You know, we use the abbreviated humanity-centered design of everything with everyone in mind. And the principles, we're very proud of having been one of the 5 US organizations. It was a small group of people, all white, all very well educated, and really lacking in diversity. But still, I think these principles have value and are still being used globally, sometimes with a little bit of tailoring, a little difference, but they are just viable principles of design. I'm going to show you some illustrations of those pertinent to today's conversation. But I do want to take a second to just, why have we shifted our language to inclusive design over universal design? It has always been one of the synonyms. So design for all, hyphenated, was what the Europeans were using. Inclusive design was what our friends in the UK have used predominantly since the 90s. For us, in a world in which human diversity is not celebrated but threatened, inclusive design more directly states a commitment. It also resonates with just folks. When we were first trying to figure out, where we're going to make the shift, I was testing it with service people in cafes and stewards and stewardesses on planes, just folks. What does inclusive design mean to you? And people pretty quickly grasp it. Maybe most importantly, it's that inclusive design means that we never get to the end. This is always a dynamic process, that we need to think about a continuous process of always trying to figure out who's left out and how do we include them. Take a minute on global policy. We're a global nonprofit. Very important to us that we be able to have the same conversation across the globe. And the International Classification of Function, Disability, and Health was a project of the World Health Organization over a decade. And it was fundamental to how we think about disability today. They basically broke apart functioning and disability. In this construct, disability is not an identity issue. This is really in a public health realm. So the first focus is on function, which is an umbrella term, a neutral term. And disability in this construct is actually a negative byproduct of a person with a functional limitation interacting with the environment. So functional limitation in their 2001 definition is considered a universal human experience because of how long we live, that we don't get out of this without that experience. Physical and mental reasons are in parity. And for those of us that design and plan, disability is a contextual variable. And this is a gift in my mind, that functional limitation becomes disabling based on the intersection of a person with a functional limitation and the environment. And they very wisely define that holistically. So it's physical, it's communication, information. Remember, in 2001, we were not quite so digitally or technologically addicted, and policy and attitude. Attitude, will always be the biggest barrier in many ways, but it is an opportunity to really think about it holistically. Back then in 2001, they recommended universal design as the most promising framework. And I think they were onto something. I think it really is. And they called for going beyond barrier removal, which accessibility is still largely about barrier removal. A worthy goal, but inadequate. They called for the identification of facilitators that really enhance participation and experience, something that very much aligns with our values. One last point on this chunk of our time together today. IHCD does one type of research at this point. We gave up on focus groups years ago because all we learned was who the dominant personalities were in the room. We now do contextual inquiry with real people interacting with real physical and digital environments. And we're really investigating that. So it's a cross between traditional interviewing and ethnographic observation. And our user experts are people with lived experience. They range from teenagers to people in their late 80s, a few past the milestone of 90. And we are very, very lucky to have over 500 of those people who work with us out of our headquarters in Boston, though we recruit them wherever we are working if it is too far afield. And we always pay them. We have only one satellite for our user expert lab, and that's at the Smithsonian in Washington. A great many of our projects are in the museum realm. So closing out for this first section, this critical question, who are you designing for? And it is not a fixed answer. It evolves. I think those of you who have had your eyes opened by knowing someone with COVID or just find yourself just reading and studying, what does it mean? What are the implications? Know that we have created some number, likely in the millions, of people who have had COVID, who have a lingering pre-existing chronic condition. Something that we have never thought about before, seems to look something like chemo brain, but maybe not exactly. And then what works for people at the edges will deliver better experiences for everyone. Really a critical way to make that case to clients. And your power as people who create environments, you create the context, and thus you minimize limitation and maximize who people want to be. And we are done with the first part. If we want to switch, Robin, to now being able to have some time for participation. I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Yes, this has been great. Thanks, Valerie. What we're going to do now is we are going to go into breakout rooms. And we are going to, I'm doing this totally randomly. So I'm not assigning, and I am going to create, there are going to be 6 breakout rooms. So there'll be 3 or 4 of you in each room. I would like you to introduce yourselves to each other again really quickly, and then you'll have about 10 minutes and just talk to each other about what just came up for you. This was amazing information. What just came up with you? Was there an aha moment? Was there a, oh my gosh, I never realized? What does this mean? What came up for you? And just share it with the others. So I'm creating the breakout rooms, and I am going to now open the rooms, and you will have about 10 minutes. And there will be a note that comes across your screen when giving you a heads up as to when the time is running out.
Are we a group of 2?
I was just going to ask that same thing.
Give it a second, maybe.
Maybe we'll, unless she's doing the count off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and going through this up to somebody joins us. Kelly, tell me who you work for again.
I work for Nathan Wexler and Company. It's a CPA firm. Mm-hmm. So all of this is, not something I play in on a regular basis. So I've learned a lot through playing.
Yeah, isn't it interesting stuff though? Oh wait, we're getting somebody. Susan.
Hi.
Moore.
Hi.
With
Hi.
a cool background. I have not dabbled in those yet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I will someday.
The salt marsh down near where I live. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was unable to join on time, so it's really nice to be able to join you.
Oh, nice. Thanks. Were you in on part of Valerie's talk?
I just got here. Sorry.
So we're reflecting on what we just heard.
Okay, well, I'd love to hear what you just heard.
I thought it was funny that, I guess this is a very, very small piece of what she had talked about, but looking at, now I'm not even going to get it right, the old and the young old and how they would categorize them. I've never heard that before. I thought that was interesting.
My mom is 87, so I've been hearing these terms.
And is she an old or not yet?
I think she's the young, she thinks she's the young old.
Okay. I
But
mean,
that's
some
all that matters.
87s are really old and some 87s are not.
Yeah, yeah. But in terms of what you were talking about for design, was this something that sort of structured different approaches based on the age group?
Well, it's universal design and inclusive design. Hi, Robin. Oh, and we're getting Todd.
Just popping in.
I have to admit, when I see something interesting when I'm watching a webinar, I hit my screenshot tool and grab it so that I have it. And the piece that I grabbed was one of the last slides she had up, and there were 3 bullets. And I grabbed the middle bullet. What works for people at the edges will deliver better experiences for everyone. And I had not, I mean, I understand universal design and inclusive design. Hadn't heard it exactly using those words and calling them people at the edges. I thought it was really interesting phrasing on that. And Todd, your everything is off. Your camera's off. Are you going to show us your smiling face? I work with Todd, so I can harass him a little bit. So yeah, I thought that was kind of the verbiage that hit me. And I'm with you, Susan. I've heard the young old and the old before. And I mean, when I was a kid, I would have thought that at my own age that was old. And of course, I don't even qualify for any of those categories quite yet, do I? I don't even
It's all perspective.
Yeah, I think the perspective.
It is perspective. It's how active you are too.
Yeah,
and
depending on so many things.
There's some 87s like your mom that are probably pretty amazing.
Well, I think so, but I'm biased. Yeah. Was there, I'm sorry I missed the presentation. Hi, Todd.
So I have just popped open my chat box on my screen, and that's how we'll hear from Todd, because Todd, you of course are going to have more insightful things than any of us.
Okay.
So anyway, if you see a little, if you see...
Living with impairments, the prevalent attitude of, just tell me what I have to do, is exasperating, but I hear it every day.
You're not going to use the chat box. You're just being sneaky today.
That's even better.
I'll close that chat box.
So can you say a little bit more about what would the alternative be that would not be so annoying?
Yeah, and it's all of us outlining the limitations. I think that's the category we're in, is that some things you can only get so far and then you're done, depending on what your limitations are, rather than embracing this all as designing for people at the edges.
It's an attitude of what should we do, not what is the minimum we must do.
Okay. Yeah.
Good point. And that's what I think a lot of these, when they're planning the design, they don't always think about that, right? It's the wrong question.
And it's an afterthought when you're done. Oh, wait.
A cat?
Hi, Sunny. I've seen Sunny on Zoom calls before.
One of my employees had a puppy give birth yesterday when we were on a call. 10 puppies.
What?
Yeah. I saw the after, wasn't live. She came, she's like, I gotta go. And so 10 little golden retriever puppies. Very cute.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm looking here too. The other thing I screenshotted just for future reference, and this was partly, Todd, I partly screenshotted this so that we can update some of the PowerPoints that we do, just the the backstory is that Todd and I work together and manage a nonprofit called Access Navigators, where we take a look at accessibility across New England and beyond sometimes, and we also educate. We speak to groups and we educate. And it used to all be in person, but actually we've done some pretty cool Zoom things lately. But a new one that would go into the PowerPoint that we do is that the CDC has these new percentages of adults, July 2020. Did you notice that, Todd? That the date has changed and the percentages with functional disability types. And so it's just so sobering to see that. And that 1 in 4 bit, that 1 in 4 of us. And I feel like we have some slides that Todd and I use that say it differently. Todd, did you screenshot that?
I gotta do the screenshot here. How do we do that?
Yeah. Well, Todd and I have cool little widgets installed on our computers for screenshotting. You can do that with that button that just says print screen, and you'll get your whole.
Oh, that's it? It will just do
that.
That's
it. And you'll be taking a picture of your whole screen.
Yep.
Yeah, it's one of those tricky things that a lot of people don't realize exists, but it's really nice during a webinar when you just want to be able to go back to some quick little slide.
Right.
There were these percentages we used to use of how many years to expect to be living without a disability just as you age. And there's a percentage of years or a number of years we're all going to, on the average, live with a disability. Is it 8 years we should each expect? Oh, we have 1 minute left. I think it was that. I think it was when you take those statistics. Yeah, 8 years.
8 years?
Each one of us, on average, will spend 8 years living with a disability.
Huh.
Related to something.
Something, yeah.
Huh.
Age, accident, I mean, we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's it. 11% of our lives. That's what it was. We had the percentage of your life, and then the math was done on average lifespan, and there you go. And then you have.
That's really kind of sobering.
Well, it puts it on you that suddenly we're not talking about other people. You're actually designing for yourself, your future self or your current self, depending, but this isn't just being good to all those other people. This is putting things in place for your own self, your future self.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
and
just,
so maybe,
it'll be quick.
Okay,
you should have given us 3.
Should have given you 3. Sorry.
3 minutes. Yeah.
Sorry. I know it's not enough time, is it?
Okay.
So what we're going to do now, thank you so much. Is everybody back? People coming back? Okay. So if you all want to mute and close your screens down again, and Valerie's going to take us through the next really quick section, and then we'll open it up for discussion amongst all of us. I think we're a big enough group for a lot of discussion, but a small enough group that it's not going to get overwhelming. So we still have some time, and this is what it's all about, is about conversation. So if you want to stop your videos and mute yourselves, then we will turn it back to Valerie.
Okay. I can see my screen. Can anyone else see it? No? Okay, hang on. Okay. Okay, this time I'm going to show you some examples. And it's really just a representative set. And I'm using those handy principles, partly because they still have value. And it's a way of framing. It's a way of thinking about it. So we're going to start with the first one, perfectly reasonable design principle, usable by people with diverse abilities. And I'm going to start with something that is really important when you think about that enormous number of people who have difficulty walking and what that means in so many environments. So we have 2 clients that have significantly either forfeited some of the benches they used to have or never had enough benches. So that is our state parks agency and our transit agency. critical environments for benches. And part of the challenge was really to undertake a study about what matters in a bench and what are the issues with benches. It's not just having them, though having them is better than not having them, but really to think about who is using them, who needs them, what are the features that make a difference. So I'm just showing you some of the things that make a difference. And the red ball in the right lower corner is, of course, the really critical issue of will it withstand a snowplow, not seeing it and tossing it into a pile. You know, it's the quality of indestructible was really one of the big things for the client. And we ended up with this bench as a first choice, but with a slight choice, a slight variation. So this was out of 8 benches. So we tested it with over 40 user experts, so people across the spectrum of ability and age. And we tilted towards older people because it was really older people who desperately needed these benches to be able to enjoy communities and the out of doors generally, and managing public transit, which can be a brute if there's nowhere to sit. But what we determined, and this was through testing, is that benches are best if they have at least one arm added to the span of the bench that allows someone to push off with 2 arms. Because for many people with bad joints, bad backs, the need for those 2 arms is really the critical element that makes benches feasible to be able to independently lift off a bench. I'm showing you from the simplest identity of a bench for the first principle to one of the biggest park projects in the country in the last couple of years. I don't know if any of you are aware of the Gathering Place in Tulsa, but part of what is interesting about the Gathering Place is that this was a deliberate choice by local philanthropists, led by one particular philanthropist whose grandparents were immigrants. They were refugees from Eastern Europe who landed in Tulsa. And Tulsa is also the site of one of the most shameful elements of racist history, and that was the destruction of Black Wall Street in Tulsa in 21. And there has continued to be a very significant Black American community in Tulsa. It basically is still a very segmented, segregated city. And this philanthropist led many other philanthropists to create a massive public park that is free to all, with a deliberate intent that there had to be a place that would work for everyone to come together. So the Gathering Place is a very deliberate choice. This is Michael van Valkenburg as primary landscape architect. And this was, obviously impossible to replicate jobs that have the kind of money that this had. But what's important about it as an example of Equitable is just that it was driven by this vision of everyone in town needed to go. Part of that vision was that the philanthropy community has basically endowed a very rich pot of money in perpetuity. It's 99 years of maintenance that has already been funded. So free access for everyone, 99 years of maintenance. And one of the issues in Tulsa is that they have deliberately made this park welcoming to people who are homeless. One of the things they have added to their capacity is sensitivity to mental health issues. So all of the park staff are trained on mental health issues. This is a very small public space, and some of you may know this. It's a children's museum here in Massachusetts, a delightful one, very small, the Discovery Museum. And this was a project that they did a number of years ago. So this is their treehouse project, and the treehouse guys were partners on this project. But what is important about this is that they paid a great deal of attention, not just to kids with physical functional issues, but kids with that wide spectrum and very diverse spectrum of brain-based issues. So they tested this extensively with kids with all kinds of issues, developmental delays, large number of children with neurodiversity, and it really is intended to provide an equal opportunity, even if you can't play comfortably with a lot of other kids. Flexible, the second principle. Again, what could be more predictable of good design? I am just showing you something that is a very recent project. We were consultants on this project. This is the brand new the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Museum, and this is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And this really raised the bar on the integration of the physical environment and the technological environment with technology consultants who were far smarter than we are about what's possible. You get an RFID tag on entry that will result in every exhibit will respond to what you need. If you need open captioning, you'll get open captioning. If you need narrative description, you will get narrative description. It's quite astonishing. Just a real tour de force worth sharing because it really sets the bar high. It's an example of just one of our projects, and it's a single home. We very seldom do these, but this was a remarkable opportunity to go the distance on everything we know about the built environment paired with an equal concern for a technology environment, so a smart home environment. And Todd, I think, knows somebody who was involved in Peak Technologies, Steve Saling, who is a man who has now had ALS for 14 years and is a self-described geek, was the vehicle by which we involved Peak Technologies. So this home, and this was our client, Steve, where he was able to manipulate doors, windows, temperature, music, his elevator, and the temperature of the house with his hands, and then with his voice, and then with the same system that Todd uses. But just a fascinating tour de force. And this is just promoting in terms of flexibility in use. We are big fans of accessory dwelling units, often a very hard thing to come by in much of the country. But it serves a variety of things on a variety of fronts, including the need for small and affordable and accessible or inclusive units of housing. But it also is a way for people to be economically sound if they own property. So I know New Hampshire has legislation that supports this. I'm sure some of you are experts in this. I just wanted to draw attention to it as something that we think has a lot more potential than has yet been realized. Simple and intuitive use, easy to understand regardless of experience and any functional issues. This is just an old favorite, and this is the Getty Museum in LA, and this is a three-dimensional map. It's basically just representing the campus, which is big and kind of sprawling, and the multi-sensory opportunity of a map that shows you size of buildings in relation to one another is sticky. You remember, I'm going to the building that is bigger than everything around it, or I'm going to the building that is attached to another. And I couldn't possibly do a presentation without talking a little bit about toilets, because toilets are indeed an important measure of equity and flexibility. So this is Junko Kobayashi, a friend of mine in Tokyo. She is a woman, she's an architect, and she runs a firm that does nothing but toilet rooms. But oh, what toilet rooms. And the first two images on the top there are actually a whole series she's done that go all across Japan. These are roadside rest stop toilet rooms. Quite amazing. The bottom one is actually a fairly typical kids' toilet room, and a kids and adult toilet room in a Tokyo mall. And then just to make myself feel badly that nothing like this exists in the United States, this is Junko's toilet room for one of the biggest transit hubs in all of Tokyo. This terribly civilized space is a place where people can pull back from the chaos that is the Tokyo subway station and actually recover themselves while they pee. Just remarkable design. Perceptible information. Communicates information effectively to the user regardless of ambient conditions or sensory abilities. So we have just finished a quick but intense project with a big team. And we were looking at the state of the art of design, of guidance and standards, and of case studies and wayfinding on design for low vision in particular. It's low vision in blind, but you know we have standards and codes that are focused primarily on blind. We have almost nothing on low vision. And one of the members of our team was Chris Downey, a blind architect based in the Bay Area and a longtime collaborator and friend. And this is one of Chris's projects, National Industries for the Blind. So this is an example of how specific population design projects can teach us about what works on projects that are not specific to this population. This is just from the Natural History Museum in London, but a really wonderful example of making 20 of the most popular items in this museum, one of the world's largest in terms of its extraordinary collection, and make it usable by everyone, make it enjoyable for everyone with all of the senses involved. Tolerance for error, a favorite principle and one that is often ignored. And I'm just giving you two examples of stairways. We often don't pay much attention to stairways and how important they are for so many people. On the left is the Met in New York. And if you have ever left the Met, thrown out of the Met at closing time during some months of the year, you are blinded as you exit because the sun is setting just opposite you. So this small detail actually dramatically reduced their liability costs by adding lit railings on that front stairway. And this is another of Chris's project, the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco. And in this case, tolerance for error is a very interesting challenge because of the number of people who frequent this space and work in this space who are blind and low vision, and the remarkable value of acoustical information. So that's part of that story. They know so much more about navigation because the place was designed with acoustical information as a critical priority. Low physical effort, used efficiently and comfortably with a minimum of fatigue. This is a lighthouse example. So here we see the difference in flooring and how important it is to think about that. And wide spaces, partly because we're dealing with a population which commonly uses a white cane or may have a service animal. And there's nothing worse than trying to figure out how to crowd into a small space with a service animal. Not really viable. This is another one of our projects, and this is an historic preservation project that is a sort of triple concerns for historic preservation, environmental sustainability, and inclusive design. And this was a very poor client, the Boston Architectural College, long before I was a trustee there, and an effort for a client that had almost no money. But part of our goal with this project was to create an environment that was usable and that dealt with that terrible entry on the upper right-hand side, but to create an entry that actually worked for students who are constantly hauling things, models and portfolios, and making an entrance that was gracious and welcoming and easy. We also restored many of the historic elements that had been torn out by the Institute of Contemporary Art. And the last principle, size and space for approach and use. And this is a landscape project by our friends at IBI Placemaking, which used to be called Carroll Johnson until they were taken, they basically created a partnership with IBI. And this is of a campus some of you may know. It's one of Massachusetts' many brutalist campuses. So this is UMass Dartmouth. And a very tough environment that really didn't work well at all. And this is a reconfiguration of this really central quad. And you can see in the bottom right, see in the bottom left, just the sort of stark, unwelcoming quality of the original design. And they're designed for a quite remarkable space. That you can see, really appreciate the appeal of that space that is so welcoming and that offers so many choices for the diversity of their students, their faculty, their staff, and the community. And one more, Walden Pond Visitor Center. And this is another It's another sort of architecture and landscape combined. And this is a DCR project. And Walden is beloved by everyone, as far as I know. And Marianne Thompson was the designer of this project for DCR. And you can see, you know, just a gracious set of solutions as aesthetically appealing with the natural materials as it is usable. And part of what they were also solving was the difficulty of crossing the road to get to the pond itself. So this is a brand new visitor center that incorporates lots of natural materials appropriate to this environment, and even keeping materials and making them into benches. This might not quite hit our bench recommendation if you're buying a new bench, but it's a pretty good solution for the existing environment. And last points. Inclusive design does serve as an effective framework for equitable environments, or at least I believe that it does, and everything that we do tells me that that is true. And we are fortunate to have had a lot of years of being the deep content experts in both accessibility and inclusive design in very, very varied environments. And we are constantly, you know, pushing ourselves and our clients to include that critical information of design research in every project. The best outcomes we find are generated out of participation, and that's with these users at the end of the spectrum, or the edge of the spectrum. And we do that in transit, we do that in higher ed. We've trained teams who are our partners in the institution we're working for, so that we build capacity in every project that we do, or at least that is our intent. But I can't stress enough the value of contextual inquiry and research, real people in real places. Whatever else there is, we learn every time about specific environments tailored for specific populations if we engage those people in the design process and engage them sometimes in plan review, sometimes in representative environments, and we pick up on things that we never would have caught with our own experience and with the existing research that we or others have done. So I thank you very much. Those are all the images that I have to show today.
Thank you so much, Valerie. This has been, wow, this has been super. If you all want to turn your videos back on and your audios, let's open this up for conversation. Let's open this up for questions. For Valerie, does anybody have, I'm sure we all have a lot of questions or comments. Would love to hear it from all of you, or any of you. Who wants
Robin,
to
I'll break the crickets if I could.
Why am I not surprised?
Well, you shouldn't be. Well, you should be, because I see
Nora.
Bob White is on the phone too. So I yield the floor. No, I will not yield the floor to the Honorable Mr. White. You know, one of the things that I find in all sorts of community interactions is the biggest struggle we have is bringing people on board. There's the fear of change. There's the, you know, the concept of designing to the fringes of the spectrum is very frightening for people that only want to think about what they perceive as the mainstream, and that being the primary benefit. So clearly education is a big part of this. What strategies have you guys used beyond obviously involving individuals with sort of that represent those the edges of the spectrum in sort of bringing people along and understanding the needs of the not universal. I won't use that.
Thank you. Inclusive.
Inclusive.
Yeah. A great question. Of course, we've all dealt with clients who can't imagine why they should do other than what they can get away with. And part of the issue is that I'm still using language of edges of the spectrum, but I think edges have really taken up much more of the spectrum than people realize. I don't think most Americans would imagine that 26% of Americans have a functional limitation. I don't think that's at all prevalent. And I think we're stuck with an unintended consequence of being the first place in the world that had really rigorous standards on accessibility. And for many people, they are sort of caught in that understanding and that knowledge, which focused on really one population, and those are people who use wheeled mobility. And that population who use wheeled mobility, if you unpack the standards with many people who use wheeled mobility, most of the attention is for people who use wheeled mobility and are paraplegic, who have good upper body strength. So it simply doesn't cut it for the reality of diversity of ability. One of the things that we found really valuable with clients is that there is a growing awareness, and this is fairly recent, maybe 5 years. More and more clients recognize in the workplace, in the university, in the museum, in the municipality, that we're dealing with a much larger diversity of brain-based conditions. And nobody has a clue what to do about that and how to make places work for that population. And that's been valuable. We're actually working with a variety of clients now where that was really a calling card. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Partly it's about us and not about them. I think
Right,
that's
right. And it's a struggle, I think, in architecture, in community planning, in anything, is sort of recognizing that us is a much bigger subset of the population than some people are prepared to accept.
And North, one last point on that. I think we all benefit from hooking our yokes to notions of wellness and well-being also, because there you get into a lot more attention by clients interested in creating an environment that really works and makes people feel more in control and healthy.
Thank you.
If I may, thank you very much.
Absolutely, Stephanie.
Valerie, thank you very much. This was really, really insightful. And one of the things that kind of struck me right from the start was it's giving planners and designers just another tool that, in the grand scheme of things, sometimes you just don't think of. The benches with the extra railings, or the lighting underneath railings. And the other thing that kind of struck me, and a little bit of a coincidence, is the sensory issues to be aware of. I do have a service dog. The past, later on, a few years ago, I ran into some medical issues that required me to enlist, a service dog. Being back in the office, a little bit at a time here, the fire alarm went off one day last week. And it was so piercing that it really has affected the dog when he comes to work now. And so that's just an example of stuff that you would never think about, as a planner, as a designer, as an emergency response, anything like that, that I really appreciate the information. And I think it's, again, just another great tool that planners and designers.
I'm glad you brought up this emergency issue, because we're looking at emergency management. We've done work on emergency management with FEMA some years ago, but we're very concerned that those people made some progress some years ago on looking at the diversity of ability, focused on function instead of just accessibility standards. And that was useful. But as the diversity of reasons for a functional limitation have changed, boy, are people not prepared. And you look at the sensory issue. One of the things that I've really just been doing research on of late is that 20% of people 70 and over in the United States have a dual limitation of sight and hearing. So we always assume that if it works, if you've lost your sight, we're going to give you a hearing solution. But 20% is a big number for whom that will not work. And we do not have great solutions for how that works. And that's a very different population than we would think of as, sort of deaf-blind from birth. It's completely different. These are acquired conditions. So there's a lot that needs to be unpacked. And people, of course, don't self-identify as a person with a disability. How many people with chronic conditions would never sort of raise their hand as a person with a disability? Most. So that's a really good reminder, though, Stephanie. That's that it's disabling to your dog.
Yeah. And
Stephanie, is Maji okay?
Thanks for asking, Stuart. But you know, I think the fire drill was one day last week, and we have had them here before. I don't know if it's a culmination of the noise that gets him. I mean, you know, when the smoke detector goes off in the house at home, it affects him. I think it's the pitch. It's so high. It's too loud for him. And by going through the training with him, there's just things that I just don't, you just never think of for him to encounter. I mean, when I was going through, you know, all this training with him, even a professional trainer wouldn't, you know, think of, oh, get him used to a smoke alarm, you know, or a fire alarm in a building. But, you know, here we are. So, I mean, he is a little bit more unsettled here. He has a little bit more of an attitude that are we ready to GO? Are we ready to
go?
Oh, poor Maggio.
Hell yeah. Just on the fire alarm issue, there is a product in Japan that was developed with a deaf woman. It's a home fire alarm that actually releases the smell of wasabi and the effect of wasabi, which means that you tear up and feel considerable discomfort. And it wakes you up.
The other thing that I was thinking of for the, you know, to combat, you know, the sheer noise is maybe just a flashing light, a strobe.
Yeah, a strobe, yeah.
And those are required to have a dual sensory, for in Massachusetts anyway.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple of years ago, Robin brought a movie about a woman in Denver who was an accessibility advocate.
That was actually Ben that did that. Yep.
Oh, was that Ben? Okay. Sorry, Ben. And I found that to be a fascinating because basically that was the sort of casting a gesture of accessible design over an entire district of a city. And so they did things such as like taking all of their intersection and raising all their intersections so that the accessibility from all the a normal handicap ramp basically became sort of a surface traverse from different quadrants of an intersection. So actually, saw the movie, and actually about 6 months later, I found myself in Denver, and I found myself actually walking across some of those intersections on the way to the convention center to a conference. And I have to say that was transformative. I work in an engineering firm, so we do sidewalks and intersections and everything. And I have to say the filtering of like a street design through the ADA is just a heartbreaking, mind-numbing checklist.
But you should actually be looking at the public rights of way guidelines, which are really in many ways much more sophisticated.
Okay. Well, that's a good start.
We also
I think we need to have lunch together. So
absolutely.
This is a longer. But I think from my standpoint, practicing in whether it's a street project or whether it's a campus project or whether it's a trail in the middle of the woods is what I have found is that designing such that the accessibility is a part of the functional and the aesthetic problem solving of the place is that it gives you a framework that makes for a very rich environment. But I have to say, I don't necessarily beat the drum on it, although I did have one project for a Riverwalk trail in Vermont where the advocate for the trail basically lied to his select board about that we didn't need to comply with accessibility guidelines for a public trail. And I had to scold him afterwards. It's, I don't scold my clients very often, but he took a whipping because I just couldn't believe, and I had given him all the briefs. I'd given him all the, all the ADAG stuff, all the stuff that he needed to know. And I had rehearsed his lines, and then he just went out of bounds. And so now I have to go and defend something that was built that that's not, and in this case, it's grossly non-compliant. So we're going to have to redo it.
Yeah.
Because he was in a hurry to get something in the ground to have a groundbreaking on Labor Day.
So we just on the sidewalk thing, or the crosswalk thing, it is important. It's a valuable tool. We are doing a design guide for the MBTA also, and we have recommended it for secondary streets. It will not work on primary arteries because it's really a bad thing for emergency vehicles, as you probably know.
Yeah, yeah.
The raised crosswalk.
The thing I found in Denver is that they are so subtle. Is that they are not abrupt. They are very gradual and very forgiving. And because Denver is, it's a grid city, yeah, huge wide streets, and people, I mean, they're all cowboys. So the way they like to drive, and so anyways, but we have been bringing that. We have some projects actually unfolding in Boston. We're going to be bringing some intersect substitute grades, and I really want to talk to you about those.
Absolutely.
So, anyways, I have found it to be just a new extension of the art form which is a portion of what we do as designers, and have found that and it's not like you have to operate within a constraint, but to lay a trail out at 5% versus 15% and know that it's not actually going to erode because it's so steep going straight up the mountainside. In the end, it builds a really nice, forgivable environment. And so I have found it enormously satisfying beyond the checklist to really make it into an art form.
Okay. Thank you.
I had a couple, sorry, go ahead.
Caitlin.
I just had a couple of observations. One thing that you touched on briefly with the Boston Architectural College is historic context. And I think most of us in New England are in relatively historic places. And so I would be interested in any resources you could point to for adaptive reuse, especially for accessing historic structures or infill design within historic contexts where you might have design standards that are looking for something, a certain kind of character that may not always be aligned with inclusive design. But something else that I thought about is being a tourist or a visitor is another kind of disability, if you want to think of it that way, and that in places like Portland, where tourism is a big part of the economy, also thinking about inclusivity of people who are unfamiliar with the place, or especially with things like transit or wayfinding systems, and improving those, making those more inclusive will actually make your place friendlier, more inclusive for that demographic of people as well.
A couple of 3 points. One, if you're interested, I can put together an FTP file of historic preservation materials. And I'll give you the primary guides we use in the US, but and there's a couple that people often aren't aware of. But it's also interesting to look at some of the international work. So if you look at some of the European guidance, it's extremely valuable to just, recognize that people are doing it for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they want to attract all of the tourists. And it's been really important to be able to attract, in particular, an aging tourist population, and make sure that it works for them, they have a good experience. So happy to put that together. Either I can send that to Robin and she can share it.
Yep, I can do that.
Yeah, the other issue is that wayfinding is central to pretty much all of our projects that are not limited to interiors. We have a full-time wayfinding person, expert, literally spent the last 40 years as a wayfinding expert. And we have worked with her as her wayfinding ally on inclusive design, but now those things are combined. She's moved to Boston and is with us. And lastly, one of the places that you should be aware of, and again, I have a lot of materials on this, but one of the world's great examples of inclusive design as it relates to the tourist experience is actually London 2012. So the Olympics were in London in 2012. They were the most inclusive Olympics ever mounted, quite extraordinary. And they did a remarkable commitment that went back to 2007 when it started, and they had guidelines in inclusive design that were really for the tourist sector as well as for Olympic Park. Olympic Park was basically a wasteland of a dump. They say 26,000 trashed cars out of the pond at Olympic Park. It was not a place anybody went on a regular basis, but everything there has to hit a very high standard of inclusive design. But more than that, they actually made it a priority for the places that tourists go in the city. So their whole cultural sector got money to support moving towards inclusive design renovations. And that was both in the visual arts and in the performing arts. So it has been a premier place to go to showcase this is what inclusive design looks like, because they made such a commitment. And they made commitments around certain communities in the city, most important the South Bank, which is a popular tourist destination, which is tied to their most accessible transit line. And that was really recreated along inclusive design guidelines. So that is one of my favorite examples of inclusive design at the largest scale. And that continues today. So there's actually an ongoing research hub and innovation lab on site at what's now called the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park.
That's awesome. Well, we're coming up on time. This went so fast. This was great. Thanks to each and every one of you for being here today. Thank you to Valerie. This was enormously eye-opening, and I hope for all of you, as I said in a couple of my communications, I hope your view did shift a little bit, that something in you shifted about how you're thinking about your work. This is just really important stuff. And I want to also ask if you're interested, and let's think about it, do we want to continue this conversation somehow? You know, do we want to continue it amongst ourselves about, and just maybe just an informal get together, just to continue talking about and giving each other support and ideas. But I'm just tossing that out there. But meanwhile, I want to thank you. I want to thank Anne Weidman for being our wizard behind the curtain there. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. And I want to thank you, Valerie, for all that you've done. And once again, thanks to AIA New Hampshire for supporting this. And thank you all, and have a great afternoon.
Hey, Robin.
Yes, Nora.
If people are interested in continuing this conversation, should they? I just saw something up on chat, but should they email you? Because we're about to hang up.
They can email me. That would be great. I'm also thinking that perhaps sometime, Heather is my program person, and I've never even mentioned this to her, but I'm thinking that the video, the 27-minute video on the changing reality of disability in America is so powerful and so eye-opening. And I'm thinking it would be nice to show that and have a conversation around that at some point too, even if we break it out into segments, because it covers, I think, is it 10 different kinds, Valerie, of disability, basic broad categories, and breaking out. There's all kinds of things that we can do, but this is an enormously important frontier that so many of us are just getting into, and I think that it's really, really important. And if we as the state of New Hampshire can stand up and say, we're addressing this in all of these different ways, I think that could be pretty powerful. So think about it.
And Robin, I'm gonna share with you a link for historic preservation materials.
Okay.
Many people may be interested in.
Yes, absolutely.
I will also send the New Hampshire demographic data on disability.
That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Any last comments? All right.
This is wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks for all being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Valerie.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.